Hello, welcome to episode 38 of the Spiritual Brainstorm. In this video, I'd like to talk about beliefs. What are they in relation to truth? And also, how do you explain that we still get to experience a kind of reality that is shared between all of us, and how that interrelates with beliefs? So, let's get right to it. So I guess the first thing that I wanted to explain is that um, let's say you are growing up in the womb of your mother as a baby, and what I saw is that basically from the infinite, whether it's the void zero or God as infinity, there is a sort of a two-way process where you could say that infinite consciousness sort of splits into various um, elements, let's say, like for instance, the oversoul or whatever. I mean, we've given, or the soul, and then a soul fractal, a higher self, whatever. I really don't know what the terminology is here because we've given these things a terminology, but basically, that universal consciousness sort of fractures itself into smaller and smaller bits until it sort of integrates inside the baby. And so there is one sort of force that pulls the baby forward once the baby is born outside of the womb, pulls the baby forward in going the other direction after birth. But also during birth, it's almost as if the entire process of 9 months is allowing the physical body to sort of align with all of the truths or beliefs or the way the reality is structured in the world, in the reality construct that it's about to be born in. Otherwise, it would just, the moment it's born, it would vanish or disappear or go somewhere else. So, it experiments with being, well, you could say, because we are life, then we experience first like cellular division. Then we experience the invertebrate state. I don't know how you spell that. Then we experience the vertebrate, but very basic. Where you're kind of like almost like a fish or something, and then gradually you sort of move towards being a human, and then um, right where the baby is kind of before it's born, you have a sort of a mingling of those two forces that sort of bundle up and create that human being, which is then born on the outside. And then whether that human being or humanity at large, there is a two-way process. So one is you want to go back to reaching towards infinity. So rekindling with your higher self, with your soul fractal, with your soul, with your oversoul, with God, the absolute universal consciousness. But there's also a pull towards finding out where you came from and reverse engineering the reality construct that you're in. And so you have these two processes that are going on for humanity and for that are valid for humanity or for an individual person. And so that's kind of how you explain that we share the same reality, and that beliefs, it's not because you believe something, for instance, that the world has been created 6,000 years ago, that that canyons are going to disappear, or that dinosaur bones are going to disappear, or that certain things are just not going to vanish from your reality. What will happen is you will be shielded from seeing that part of the reality, which is a huge, like, let's say reality is a whole sphere of complex experiences and things, and your beliefs simply filter out of reality, which is very, very complex and sophisticated and very complete, actually. It'll filter out for you. You will only see basically that which you believe. And so the whole process that we've been going through is to gain consciousness of the entirety of reality. And once you've done that, it is almost as if you've reached back to zero. And also, you went all the way reaching to God. And we've done both. I mean, science basically says that we are coming from nothing, that this whole universe came from nothing. Of course, it adopts the materialist view of cause and effect, but that's okay, because ultimately that is one story, one part of what allows this experience to exist, what allows linear time to exist, what allows all kinds of experiences in this reality construct to exist. And at the same time, if you see that all of these spiritual teachings, everything that we've uncovered kind of in the spiritual community, you can see that also humanity and many individuals have also gone full scale the other way and reached out all the way to God as infinity rather than zero. And once you arrive at that point, then you're thrown right back into your experience again. Because, I mean, if you've been watching my spiritual brainstorms for a while now, you understand that once you go full circle and you become aware of those things, then what it unlocks for you is, first of all, you understand that everything is true, that ultimately what your ultimate freedom is to choose, consciously choose your experience, the experience you want to have, and and move forward in this kind of game, like become now part of something larger that will have to go through the same exact process of reverse engineering itself, understand where it came from, and also reaching out to infinity. So you're thrown back right into the now, because you understand that this is not something you can work with, and it's about accepting the entirety of the reality you're in and transform beliefs into choices instead of things that you have to compete for and convince others of. So that's one thing. The other thing is, there are certain let's say, hierarchies of beliefs. The first set of beliefs are the ones that are encoded into you during your gestation in the womb. And those are the core ones. If you get rid of those beliefs, if you stop believing, for instance, that you're a physical body, if you stop believing that in the different layers of structuring of this reality, like, for instance, that cells exist, that atoms are real, that all of this exists, then you basically you die. It's over. You disincarnate and you go back to somewhere else. You go back to source, I guess. But you cannot hang on or continue to experience this reality construct. So there are certain core beliefs that you cannot negate. And the reason I'm saying that it's these materialist beliefs are the ones that are highly ingrained and encoded in our very inner beliefs that are coded physically into us, is because ultimately, and this is the mind bender, is that since past, present, and future don't exist, since they don't exist, oops, then as I've always been comparing our experience as just a mirror of what we've experienced in the womb. That is, Adam and Eve reproduce, da 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 da, population rises, just as the number of cells inside the womb rises, and then the complexity of the global organism that you represent rises. Like, first of all, it's just a few stem cells in the womb, and then they diversify into organs, and then those organs start functioning together, and then like a sort of a global collective consciousness for that baby is born, which is actually your consciousness comes from that collective awareness or consciousness of those cells being part of a global organism. I mean, all of these things. But ultimately, when the baby is conceived, don't you think that the end result already exists at the moment of conception? And so, what I think is that the ultimate future, we incarnating into our different bodies and different lives, we have agreed already, we have pre agreed to test or experience the a materialist sort of belief system or reality construct. We have pre-agreed to that, and it's as if and here I'll have to go a little bit deeper, but just understand that, for instance, let's imagine that this is the moment where we're born as a collective global organism. Oops. And this is like Adam and Eve, or the very first humans. And there's a certain story that comes out of this, and this is the global organism. And it's almost as if the ultimate future of materialism already exists, and you are only living through the linear experience of bridging those two. And the reason I'm saying this is that ultimately it's almost like for instance, here you have the ancient Greeks with Plato, for instance, which were one of the first ones or Aristotle, which were one of the first ones to say that to come up with the concept of atoms, or the fact that we're made of these little balls of matter. And there is a kind of a game here of going back and forth from future, quote unquote, to past, and sort of tweaking this whole thing as a sort of it's almost like a sort of a quantum game or something. I don't know how you call it. A multi-dimensional game where everything is sort of tested and then is tweaked to make sure that all of this comes into focus simultaneously. So, of course, before you have a different reality construct. For instance, before then, here, let's say here, it's like ancient Egypt, or Atlantis. Atlantis, yeah, sorry. So the idea here is, and this is really complex, so I'm sorry, I'm getting a bit lost, but how many different interfaces or different layers of, or different rules, let's say, can you come up with to bridge two ideas? For instance, that of you becoming part a human or a humanoid, self-aware creature to become a part of something bigger than itself, and nothing, void, and just like color or light. Because ultimately, the ultimate truth is that we are living light. Um, and then it's just about how do you, inside all of the possible combinations of experiences you can have in infinity, what rules do you create for yourselves? What limits do you create for yourself to be able to restrict that experience? And here, materialism is just one set of limitations that you can put between void, nothingness, and the humanoid experience. For the Atlanteans, they had a different kind of sets of layers or understanding for the universe. They had an understanding in terms of crystals, in terms of sound technology, and interactions with sound. But ultimately, it's about the structuring of these intermediary layers or limitations. Like we would call them the laws of physics, chemistry, biology. That is how we have structured the rules or the limitations that we placed on our own experience to be able to um, have a certain experience with an infinite potential. And the Atlanteans built a different sets of interfaces or sets of rules or sets of limitations that are structured differently from these. And so, like I was saying, that reality is more like an interface, like an operating system. What you can experience under Linux is not the same as Windows. What is similar is that ultimately it allows your monitor to display a certain, so the little lights, the LED lights inside your monitor, so you have little pixels of light here. The operating system allows you to display a certain image and then have a certain experience within that interface, and manipulate those little LED lights so they display one particular sets of images or interface versus another. And the same happens to us here. So what I'm trying to say here is that maybe at a very early stage, when this quantum game, for instance, of tweaking this particular interface was not yet fully functional, then you may have had myths and crazy things happening that were real or really experienced by humanity, but that quickly subsided. And once this materialist sort of end game or end ultimate goal for stabilizing the interface manifested, then all of this kind of disappeared. And so the way I'm seeing this is that imagine that these humans here before ancient Greeks, even like, I don't know, 4 or 5 thousand years ago, were living in a mythology world where you had magical creatures like dragons and stuff and all kinds of things. Well, just imagine that there is a kind of a lightning or a kind of like all of the potential experiences that you can live, that you can experiment into the future with those kinds of beliefs um, emerge, and there's a feedback loop saying, well, if you keep those mythological beliefs, it will actually, you'll come to a dead end at some point. So it sends back information to the now, which is there's always only this now. And then the ancient Greeks come up with this idea of the atom, let's say, and a stable physical reality. And then within that framework and within that kind of belief, that also sort of sparks another sets of what I would call like lightnings into the future, where the consequences of those beliefs are tested, and that also has a dead end. And back there's a feedback loop, and then you have to find something else. For instance, um, monotheist religions, which, if you look at this picture, it's almost as if humanity basically was sometimes going one direction a little bit more, and then in the other, like this is like the ancient Greeks were going towards this way, but they were only like in their polytheist versions, especially like the Romans and their polytheist gods, only advanced so far in reaching back to the source, back to God. And then monotheist religions went a little further, and then materialism went a little further down this way, and then spirituality went a little further down this way. You see, and so ultimately you're just going one way, then the other, then one way, then the other, and ultimately it all comes into focus here. And so the future, this materialism, which is transcended, of course, by spirituality at the very end, sorry, um, exerts a kind of influence on the past and makes sure that people like 500 years ago or even 1,000 years ago, even though they didn't have um, these rules yet, the physics, chemistry, and biology, that those concepts didn't even exist, they still had that experience as if those laws pre-existed. But it's not that those laws pre-existed from the time immemorial. It's just that there is this kind of influence of the future on the past, making sure that it drags your experience along the I would say like the lightning bolt, but kind of the lightning bolt, which ends up where on that timeline you end up discovering materialism, because the other ones where you don't and you keep a monotheist view of reality, that's a dead end. So there is this kind of influence, and here you could do the same. Like you have this one lightning bolt which joins up with monotheist religions and so forth. And so even when you're very close to this threshold, this bridge, this event or this ascension that we're talking about, even there you have this kind of back and forth feedback loop between the future and the now. Well, the future, which is a potential. So, for instance, in the 1960s, you had like the JFK and the risk of a nuclear war. And so there is like these feedback loops between a future where we all die in a nuclear apocalypse, and then and then you have like almost a correction in the past saying, okay, well, JFK needs to be the president because he will not fire the missiles, blah blah blah. So we need to make sure that, you know what I mean. Or for instance, let's say 2008, we're going to have an all-out war between the U.S. and China. So how do we avert that? Okay, let's have a financial crisis instead, and that will divert the tensions away from war into fixing the economy. And you have all these little back and forth between future potential and today, and all of the events that we're living ultimately is always that kind of process where you go, where you from every now you sort of split into plenty of different lightning bolts that test different probabilities, and then you get feedback from that at an unconscious level, and that adapts your now so that you shift always to get towards that goal. And so, like I was saying, for instance, materialism sort of got us all the way to nothing, And ultimately, when you go back to nothing, and especially when you go just a little bit further in materialism, which is the what people call this quantum quackery, where you just think that everything is quantum, nothing is material. Well, that is the bridge to spirituality, of course. And once you understand that everything is a vibration, and that we're in this kind of reality construct or interface, then that's the moment where your influence on reality can be unlimited. And the more we've reached down towards reverse engineering this process, um, the more power we have over reality. But at the same time, you have to have that kind of path back towards source on the other side, so that you are balanced here, and you become a real responsible conscious creator of worlds, of realities. And this process of things coming into focus is valid for humanity as a whole, but also for your own experience as a human, as a single human. So it's almost as if this is your birth, this is death, and there is a back and forth kind of messages being sent from the future to your past, from the past to your future, and all of your experience sort of shifts towards um, your own evolution, which you experience as linear, which in fact um, is an upward movement of different timelines that are more and more evolved of your experience um, across all of your life from past to future. So I don't know how to say this because it's really complicated to explain. But just imagine that, for instance, and this is just a metaphor, of course, to explain, but let's imagine that you're a little kid, and you were going to fully believe in Santa Claus until your death. And so you wouldn't have evolved your consciousness that much. And so then there's like a future self that sends you information that's saying, that realized that Santa doesn't exist at age 50. And he sends information back into your past saying, actually, and puts a life event here where you realize that Santa doesn't exist when you're 5 instead of 50. And that shifts you into another timeline where you discover more things. And you're not in this stuck in this myth that Santa exists. Of course, this is just a silly example, but I think you get the picture. Like at every single moment of the now, your future from your now exists and sends feedback to your now, so that you can shift to a different future in the next now, which is a bit more evolved. And so what you get to experience is this linear, I need to use different colors here, a sort of a linear experience like this, like time and evolution of your thoughts and beliefs. But in fact, it's not so much linear as it is, you've never moved from your now. It's almost as if you were born in the middle, and you just shift upwards in terms of your understanding of reality, of your experiences, of who you are, of accepting different parts of you, of healing things. Because again, I've explained this already, but if, for instance, from your future, when you're 30, you heal a childhood trauma when you were 5, for instance, the disappointment of knowing that Santa doesn't exist, and the fact that you really hated your parents for lying to you. If you heal that, then you're sort of not attached to this timeline anymore. You're shifted to another one, and so the entire experience shifts completely. Now, one thing that is also difficult to understand is that on a there's also a sort of a structuring here of your experience, um, of your experience of your linear time and what's happening to you. And there is like a nested free will kind of process going on, where your oversoul, your soul, your soul fractal, or rather your, or you can use other terms like your subconscious, your unconscious, and your conscious, they they all get to decide what they want, and they will all get what they want. So let's say that, for instance, you have this is one day in your life, from morning to evening, and your oval soul say, I want to today to experience the theme of friendship, which is very, very broad as a theme, but it wants to experience that no matter what. Then your soul would say, okay, but um, I want to experience something else, like I don't know what. Let's say seeing like friendship, but seeing a specific friend, like some kind of conflict with bestie, your best friend. Okay, fine. Because those two souls sort of agreed on their level that they want to experience that. And then your soul fractal said, okay, but I want to eat popcorn today. Okay, fine. And so it's as if your day you had like one or two kind of events that were planned by the oversoul, then a few here that were planted by your soul. And then the rest is like what you do between those two, it doesn't really matter. But you'll get to hit those kind of spots that were placed there for you no matter what. And so here is one timeline where you, for instance, go and grab a coffee at Starbucks, or here is where you stay at home and you make yourself a latte with your coffee machine. But ultimately, it doesn't matter because there's this one event that your oversoul has placed there that you will get to experience no matter what. Like, for instance, you'll walk into a dog shit at 9:56. Because that's where all those timelines sort of converge to. And then they split again, and you can go and buy a new pair of shoes or clean your existing shoes, and that doesn't matter. That's your free will. You can do whatever you want in terms of the soul fractal or the conscious self. And then again, there's like an event that you have to experience that's really important. And when I'm saying an event, we're almost thinking like I give you the example of a concrete thing where those timelines converge, like a place, like stepping in dog shit at a specific place. But when we're talking about oversouls or souls, that's not that kind of planning. It's more this theme based or experience based, which you can experience anywhere. Like, for instance, you can walk in a dog shit in just about any street, or you can experience friendship just about anywhere, and you can experience conflict with your bestie just about anywhere as well. So it's extremely flexible, and very little like we're not really restricted. I wouldn't call that being restricted, but those are the things that you will get to experience regardless of what you do, whether you fly to Hawaii or you stay at home. And so that's why we still have free will, but there's certain themes or these overarching things that we will get to experience no matter what. And that is valid for a day, for a life, for your own life, even for the span of a minute, for instance. Um, I mean, we split into, there's always this kind of, I think there's like this alternation between splitting into being conscious in the now and then being unconscious and testing infinite possibilities into the future. And based on the infinite past timelines, and then matching those two sort of deciding that you will be thinking about this past timeline to experience that future timeline right here. Because obviously, what you concentrate on in terms of the past determines what you will experience in the future, but that process happens instantaneously, simultaneously. And there's this back and forth between those states where you're conscious in the now, experiencing the now, and then unconsciously testing infinity and getting feedback from infinity. And our conscious self, depending on how much you've worked basically, or trained yourself, or in understanding this process, in making an effort into reaching into the unconscious and the subconscious, then you can get more and more intuition into, or control over, what you want to experience. Control that is not really control, but because you know what the agenda of your subconscious or your unconscious is, and you know what they want from you, then they don't have to make you step into a dog shit so that you will get to the next one, and then the next one, and the next one. That's also something I wanted to talk to you about, is that if you are living only in the conscious and you completely disregard the subconscious and the unconscious, it will have to manipulate you in a way. I don't like to use that term, but manipulate. I don't like to use that term, but I guess it's the best one that fits, in order to get what they want. So basically, the more you awaken, quote unquote, the more you get in touch with your unconscious or subconscious, I mean both, the less you're surprised by what's going to happen to you, your experience, and the less you're kind of, your experience is bumpy in like the real world, because you can go in a straight line, because you know what the unconscious and subconscious have a want to live, and then your conscious self has sort of much more freedom to experiment or do things that are pleasurable or nice. It's like, instead of being this ball in a pinball game, which is thrown back and forth because there's resistance, um, you get to experience a much smoother experience when you're aligned with when all of your levels of self are aligned: conscious, unconscious, subconscious, when they're sort of cooperating, when there isn't resistance or contradictions between the wishes of one and the other. um, and I mean, this process where basically the future and the past, um, where did I draw that here? Oops. Yeah. So this process of breaking into an infinite number of possibilities and getting feedback, and then experiencing something in the now, we all have that power, so to speak. So we all can project ourselves and get back information to our consciousness of a few seconds or more in advance, and that's what we call precognition, for instance. Or like the fact that you have this feeling, you have this uneasy feeling that something is wrong when you're driving down the highway, and then 2 or 3 seconds later, you see an accident happening right in front of you. That is because you're constantly moving from your now into exploring plenty of different timelines, and you get back information, which in the most essential form is emotions, the feelings. And if you train that, then you actually get information much more than just emotions, which will, for instance, cause you to pay more attention as you're driving, but you actually know what's going to happen. And the more you train that, the more information you can get from that. But the problem is, the information, understand that it's not necessarily always accurate, because say an hour later, if you try to project things an hour or a year or 10 years into the future, you're on this timeline right here, for instance, in some in some future, and then that also splits into an infinite number of realities and tests the future. But of course, if you understand certain logics, certain trends in the universe, then you can sort of hit or predict certain things much more easily, like this ascension process, for instance, um, is something that can be predicted because once you understand the logic and the way things work, then you understand that this predicting this ascension is the same as a doctor predicting when a baby is going to be born. What it cannot predict, and that's why very little people were talking about this virus or predicted this coronavirus and this pandemic, is because the form is much more difficult to predict since it is linked to um, so a big, much more complex sort of process. It's like the difference between predicting an event and how it will be subjectively perceived by your friend, for instance. So imagine if you make a surprise party for your friend for the birthday. um, that event is kind of set, but you have no idea how your friend is going to actually experience and live it from the inside. And so that's the problem with, all of these channelers always talk about things that are very generic, in terms of the ascension, and that's totally normal because they have no idea how how we as humanity, as the collective unconscious that we are, will subjectively perceive or experience the event that is happening to us from the inside, quote unquote. It's like a doctor not being able to project um, what a baby would experience during birth, even though the doctor has an objective viewpoint from the outside on what is happening to the baby, but it has no idea what the baby is going to actually feel, or the way that it's going to interpret or experience what is going on. So I'm wondering if I'm done here. I've been a little bit all over the place, so sorry about that. But yeah, so there's just one last thing that I wanted to talk about, and that is because we were talking about beliefs. Um, and one important thing here is doubt. So I think doubt is also an evolutionary trait. That is, imagine, for instance, that at some point you had a humanoid that would have a belief and then would stick to that belief and would never, ever doubt or question that belief. What kind of experience do you think that human or that humanoid could have in infinity? A circular one that is not very interesting. And so you have this sort of this golden, this balance, this perfect compromise between doubt on one hand and sticking to your beliefs on the other hand. Because if you doubt everything, on the other hand, if you had a humanoid which doubted everything and had no belief and would switch from one belief to the other, then it would be so chaotic. The experience would be completely chaotic. It would go all over the place. Would not be coherent at all. So too much coherence, which means a circular experience, which means you go nowhere in infinity. You're just stuck in place. I am that I am that I am that I am that I am. Uh, Pure doubt, which gets you so much out of all over the place. I am not, I am, I'm not, I'm not, I'm not, I am, I'm not, I'm not, I'm not, I am. And you go, and then something between the two, which is, am I? Question, am I? Or what am I? Or why am I here? And then just kind of build on that question you experience, and so you have this. It's almost as if the way that we even the way that we stick to beliefs and transition to new beliefs is a very important evolutionary trait, because that determines very much how we get to experience reality, and even the structuring between core beliefs and subjective beliefs, which are fine, and which allow for an individual experience within a broader reality that is the same. And even there's flexibility. Like, for instance, a Tibetan monk can experience levitation, but only if he's in his temple very far up the mountains where there's nobody to see him except maybe a few people. And those few people are the ones that are there by no chance, of course. They're there because their beliefs are, um, let's say, open enough for having that experience without judging it, or without, they're basically open to seeing that. And also that any proof they may bring to the real world will be able to say, like, people will be able to say, oh, that's Photoshop. So that there's always doubt, and people have the choice to stick to their core beliefs or not. Um, and so that's how this is a very subtle mix between beliefs and doubting your beliefs. Um, I mean, that's what creates this kind of evolutionary drive forward. Um, so yeah, I mean, what else? What else can I say? Um, I guess there's another thing that's really important and that I want to touch on. It's that you don't need to have beliefs to have an experience in some regard. For instance, the Bushmen in the Kalahari Desert, apparently they can use telepathy instinctively, and that's transferred as kind of a knowledge transferred from, um, let's say, conscious beliefs here. That's really important. You don't have to have conscious beliefs to have an experience. So they use telepathy instinctively to be able to communicate, like when they've hunted an animal, killed an animal some 70 miles away, and they're bringing it back to the village. The people there, they're already preparing the fire, and they're already celebrating because they know you're bringing in um, this animal. They already know what has happened. They have no idea how that works, and it's not necessarily a belief. It's almost like it's just part of the skills or the competences they've developed, like an animal, basically, which instinctively does certain things and doesn't know why or how it's doing it. But what's nice is once you consciously are aware of all of your beliefs, which your beliefs are ingrained to you when you're a baby via the subconscious, basically. So it's as if when you're a baby, you're really tuning in to your environment and saying, oh, I'm with people that cannot use telepathy, so kill that competence in my brain. Oh, I'm with people that are newborn Christians, and well, I don't know exactly all of the kind of beliefs that a sort of a baby, a tiny baby, programs itself with by tuning into its environment and observing on a subconscious level its parents. and then society in general. But that's also part of the process of stabilizing in the reality construct um, of wherever humanity is at a certain stage. Because otherwise, if you start pulling things like, oh, levitation, I can do that, okay, great, then you're going to completely break from that reality construct bubble, find yourself on the outside, and then leave your body. Which, by the way, babies spend more time sleeping than being awake. So, in a way, I would say they spend more time in the astral plane than in the quote unquote real plane. And even if you look at their interactions for the first 2 months of their lives, they're not really there. It doesn't seem like they're there physically speaking in their bodies. They don't really understand what's going on the outside. They're just fully absorbing just to be able to stabilize within the reality construct, understand what is a can do and a cannot do, whether telepathy is something that is used by the sort of more local consciousness reality construct they're born in, or whether it's something they should kill because otherwise they may find themselves outside of the reality construct bubble and dissociate from their body, basically. Or basically, so it's like if they were misaligned between this bundling up of the zero and infinity, um, that's the process of bundling up those beliefs in a way that attaches you to a certain reality construct and ensures that you can have an experience within it. And then you kind of sort of unbundle it, and that's the process of evolution, is that having doubt and whatever then allows you to go further and further down in reverse engineering this, unlocking new things that you thought were not possible just because there is this doubt as part of the the mix, where you question your own beliefs, the way you were programmed, consciously or unconsciously, and that can make the experience evolve. And as an individual, you can evolve, and also as a collective. So I hope this was interesting. I'm sorry if it was all over the place, but it's really a difficult thing to tackle, um, especially this part where um, everything happens at once. And yeah, maybe I'll just finish with this one metaphor that I really like is video games. So imagine you have the head developer, an artist that does everything, programs the whole game. And then that developer breaks into, like, launches four different threads. You call them threads, where he sort of incarnates, let's say incarnates, as a player in level one, level two, level three, and level four simultaneously. Because, of course, those levels are programmed. I mean, he programmed them. And then he sort of plays along here, plays a bit with the little avatars and controls them simultaneously. And then he sees that if this one acquires a weapon here, then in level two, that weapon will end up killing an important I don't know, like person that has to give a potion that he'll need in level three. And so it's like, okay, so I'll tweak the weapon here, make it shorter so that he doesn't accidentally impale this person, and that allows them for having a special potion here that he'll need in level three. Oh, but then in level four, I have to. I mean, he needs a special hat to kill the um, mage. But he has to acquire it in level one. So okay, so I'll hide it here, in this little treasure trove that he'll find, and it'll be hidden there, and so he'll have it in the other levels. And so what I'm trying to explain to you here is that the developer is kind of like our oversoul. It manages multiple incarnations across multiple timelines, which we would say this is the future, level 4 is the future, and this is the past. And the Oversoul is like this genius developer that can correct bugs along the way, while you're actually playing the game. It can correct things because it has no problem in having this kind of feedback from the future into the past and vice versa. This cross fertilization of making sure that, and so the entire game sort of appears simultaneously and tweaks itself simultaneously across all levels so that it's coherent and consistent. And then what's nice is that the developer then incarnates to have the most immersive and most real experience within it, which is this plane, the 3D material universe. So it's the most smooth and linear experience of a game, which ultimately, and at this level, you could even say that this is the soul level. It's not yet even the level we are at. We are at the level where the game has been tweaked so much that we get to enjoy the ride. So it's almost this kind of like an open world game where the big boss and the big events are certain, and in between those you have the freedom to sort of do whatever you want. And it's that same kind of image as what I was saying here, where your soul or your oversoul decides on specific really important things that it wants you to experience because it needs that for its evolution, and the rest is like it's your freedom, you can do whatever you want between those points. Where was I? Here. So, but in this instance, you are at the same time the developer, at the same time you are the soul, which sort of the threads, which are testing different things and see things from still a third person kind of view. So impersonal. And at the same time as well, you are the 3D avatar that's actually immersed in the experience. You're all three. And why do you do it? Well, if you ever developed a video game, it's really completely different when you're developing it and when you're playing it. And it's a lot of fun to actually get to play what you've programmed yourself. And so the Oversoul sort of programs something like a video game with certain rules, basic rules, like duality, like gravity, like plenty of different things. And then it's really absolutely great for it to go and test it out in real life, which to us, our 80 years or so in this world, may seem like an eternity, but from the developer perspective, it's the same as running a 1 hour debugging, on your video game, or a 1 hour, or just doing a 1 hour testing. And then you're done from your test, and then you're like, maybe I should change this parameter here, and it'll be an even better game. And again, it's this feedback process from the user experience, and this veil of ignorance, for instance. Why is it there? Because if you remember that you're the developer, and you remember the video game and how you've developed it, you're not going to play it. You're not going to play it as an actual player. You're going to play like someone that knows the game. I mean, it's like if you've developed Super Mario and you know every single shortcut to every single level. Well, how fun is that? Not very fun. But if you actually place a veil of ignorance on yourself as you incarnate into the 3D to test your own game, the sort of set of rules that you've made up for yourself, then Well, it's a lot more fun because first of all, you actually get to play it as if it was the first time and you never tried it before, and you play it in a way that is completely unforeseeable. You don't know what you're going to do in your open world game if you don't know what is expected of you or what you're supposed to do. And that's the whole fun, is to sort of discover along the way clues that will get you to different um, sort of checkpoints or bosses or events that you've placed there for yourself. And along the way you sort of get clues to that, and then you get close to it, and then when you reach them, then it's really great because you're like, wow, um, I had no idea how to play it, but it still got me to that point, and it was a much more rich experience than if I was playing it as the developer that sort of knew what I was doing. I actually prepared a video to illustrate it because I found this is a very popular meme in the game developing community, for instance. It's this idea of fixing a bug mid production. And so that's pretty funny, of course, and it's a very well known meme in the developer community. But ultimately, that's exactly what it looks like when you are an angel or your higher self. You know, like the locomotive basically is you. That train that you saw in the video was you, and then that little guy that was sort of seeing the hurdles that you had placed along the way. You see your experience as being smooth, and then your angels are running around and kicking stuff out of your way so that you avoid the biggest problems or hurdles or things that could happen to you, disasters, accidental deaths that you would never get to experience, that you never get to experience, thanks to all of that kind of um, work that they're doing to get you through all these things. So it's such a sophisticated thing. I hope I've sort of helped you with this metaphor of the developer. Um, and so again, like, feel free to ask questions. And again, sorry for being so hectic here and going all over the place. But it's really, really a tough cookie to crack. This concept of beliefs. Um, how do you explain that we still get to experience a common reality, even though we may have different beliefs, the different hierarchies between beliefs, and how this whole process sort of works across past, present, and future, and how you can predict that certain things are going to happen when you understand the kind of logic, when you take the point of view of the developer. But you cannot predict, of course, this um, and how it's going to be subjectively perceived when you hit that landmark, from the point of view of a player that has the veil of ignorance. So feel free to leave questions. I'm sorry I didn't do a live this time, but um, I was actually sick, so I would have been coughing all over the place, which is never a good experience during a live. So I'm just recovering now, and so I thought I'd do this video. And yeah, talk to you next time.